Before I begin this video, I'd like to apologise briefly to one of my subscribers. I said by now I'd have my video about the NHS completed, but that just isn't the case. To be very honest, my heart just isn't in it right now. I promise I will get round to it eventually, but as it stands, my heart just isn't in it. Now, to get to the video at hand, I need to do my best to define liberalism. Liberalism is a word that gets thrown around a lot in modern political discourse, both by the left and the right. So in times like these, we need to take a step back, do a little research and find out what libertarianism actually is. That is to say, what's the definition? So first, we'll look at the Wikipedia article for liberalism, because Wikipedia, despite what people say, is quite a good source of information. So it says here, in the Wikipedia article for liberalism, liberalism is a political philosophy or worldview founded on ideas of liberty and equality. Liberals espouse a wide array of views depending on their understanding of these principles, but generally they support ideas and programs such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, free markets, civil rights, democratic societies, secular governments, gender equality, and international cooperation. And in the Wikipedia article for Classical Liberalism, it says, Classical liberalism is a political ideology and branch of liberalism which advocates civil liberties under the rule of law and emphasizes economic freedoms found in economic liberalism, which is also called free market capitalism. Classical liberalism was first called that in the early 19th century, but was built on ideas of the previous century. It was a response to urbanization and to the Industrial Revolution in Europe and the United States. Notable individuals whose ideas contributed to classical liberalism include John Locke, Thomas Jefferson, Jean-Baptiste, Thomas Malthus, and David Ricardo. It drew on the economics of Adam Smith and on a belief in natural law, utilitarianism, and progress. Now then, as you can see, it all sounds quite good, right? You can probably understand after hearing that why so many political YouTubers identify as liberal and also consider it a left-wing position. However, there's a couple of flaws in this ideology that I must address and why I personally can't get on board with it. You see, the problem with freedom of economy and free markets is that it inevitably leads to neoliberalism. Why though? Well, think about it. How much liberty and personal freedom can you have before your personal liberty and freedom directly encroaches on the freedom of others? In the capitalist system, you're only as free as your financial situation allows. Once an individual becomes successful, creates a multinational company, and they are finally enjoying the freedom that only that sort of money can allow, that's all well and good. But what about everyone that works under him and his corporation? They hire their workers for minimum wage, directly keeping their employees in a state of wage slavery, where they have to work for most of their day, every day, just to earn enough money to get by each month. They create workplace environments that are horrible to work in, where managers mistreat their workers. They end the possibility of overtime, implement 0 hours contracts, make their workers work on holidays, and so on. After all, it's their corporation. They have the freedom to do what they want with it. But what about all of the people working in such a company? What freedom do they have? Not much, right? Now, I know what liberals are going to say. Hey, they have the freedom to choose not to work, and moreover, they can choose to work at a different company if they don't like the conditions within their current one. But okay, but then what about those that are in between jobs? What about those with disabilities who can't work? What about elderly people? What freedom do they have? Not much, right? I disagree with freedom of the free market in this sense. I think if you're going to use your personal liberty to create a business and so on, you have a responsibility to make sure your freedoms and liberty aren't going to encroach on the freedom and liberty of others. And if you're unwilling to do so, that's where the government need to step in. When people don't have the benefit of being handed down an inheritance by a rich family, they have to work. You can't not work in a capitalist system, or you can't even afford food to eat. Capitalism will literally kill you if you don't have money. That's not freedom. There's no liberty in this model. That's why I believe in a different kind of liberalism, liberal socialism. Essentially, libertarianism through a socialist framework. It allows for all the benefits that liberalism gives us, such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to love and have sex with whoever you want, etc., etc., but ensures that other people's freedoms aren't hurt in this process. Let's take a look at the Wikipedia page for liberal socialism and see what we think, shall we? Liberal socialism is a socialist political philosophy that includes liberal principles within it. Liberal socialism does not have the goal of completely abolishing capitalism and replacing it with socialism. Instead, it supports a mixed economy that includes both private property and social ownership in capital goods. Although liberal socialism unequivocally favours a mixed market economy, it identifies legalistic and artificial monopolies to be the fault of capitalism and opposes an entirely unregulated economy. It considers both liberty and equality to be compatible and mutually dependent on each other. Principles that can be described as liberal socialist are based on the works of several philosophers. Liberal socialism has been particularly prominent in British and Italian politics. Liberal socialist seminal ideas can be traced to John Stuart Mill. Mill theorized that capitalist societies should experience a gradual process of socialization through work-controlled enterprises coexisting with private enterprises. Mill rejected centralized models of socialism that could discourage competition and creativity, but argued that representation is essential and a free government and democracy could not subsist if economic opportunities were not well distributed, therefore conceiving democracy not just as a form of representative government, but as an entire social organization. So there you have it. Too often the classical liberalists of YouTube seem to think liberalism is the ultimate ideology, that people should be completely free. The individualist libertarian ideology is selfish and breeds inequality. This is something I've said countless times in multiple videos. We've had enough classical liberalism for now, in my opinion. It's time we implemented liberal socialism, social democracy, allowing for personal liberty and freedom while simultaneously ensuring that it can be enjoyed by everyone in society by proper wealth distribution, regulation and reform. You'd think people would learn from the past, but they don't. They're so stuck in their libertarian bubble, they can't possibly imagine anything better. And what's even scarier is that lately we've seen liberals shift to the right, fully embracing reactionary politics and giving birth to what I would call liberal conservatism, with people like Dave Rubin declaring how he has left the left. In fact, some libertarians, such as that guy T, have now even dabbled with the idea of liberal fascism as a means to defeat the left. Let that one sink in for a moment and tell me how that makes you feel. I'm not a liberal. I probably never will be, but I am a liberal socialist. To close out this video, I would just like to clarify something. I've got no problem with liberals, at least left libertarians anyway. I believe in left unity, so for the most part I see you as an ally. I am merely speaking my mind and sharing my thoughts and opinions. I still very much like many libertarians, Nightmare Fuel and TJ Kirk being two of them. However, let's not kid ourselves. Classical liberalism is a flawed ideology. Liberal socialism, however, that's my jam. Thank you for watching. This is the Rational Leftist signing out. And until next time, keep it rational.
Can I talk about just a bit more about capitalism?
Yes.
Jim Callaghan famously said to a Labour conference, when he was Chancellor, I want industry to be profitable. It's in your interest, that's the union's interest, that industry should be profitable. Do you agree in principle with private industries making profit?
Well, I mean, all schools are uneconomic, aren't they? All hospitals are uneconomic. And once you apply the market force test, why do we have elections? surely the simplest thing would be, when there's a vacancy, the candidates would put in a bid, and on polling day, the returning officer would open the bids and say, Mr. Jones has won this thing. Why have a Prime Minister? I would offer to do that job at half his salary, maybe a little bit better. I mean, once you start applying market forces, you don't have citizens anymore. You have consumers.
Well,
and a consumer is not the same as a citizen.
There are different arenas, aren't there? There's schools and there's elections on the one hand, but there is private companies that make things or produce things or provide services. And the simple question is whether you, in principle, see anything wrong with private companies making profit.
Well, no, the question of who gets the profits, I mean, in the case of the United States at the moment, the profits are all, and in Britain, all going to the top and not to the people who do the work. But now I'm particularly keen on small businesses. I came up with a scheme which was turned down, predictably, by the Common Market Commission, that we would say to small companies employing less than 50 people, we'll abolish all taxation if you give us a share of your profits. So they wouldn't have only the paperwork. And it was a very good idea. I'm not against the entrepreneur at all. But in the end, you find you're dealing not with companies interested in profit, you're dealing with centres of power. I mean, the oil companies are bigger than nation states. And when I dealt with the oil companies, they treated me, well, I remember one of them saying, I'm not dealing with you, Mr. Bain. And I said, why? And he said, well, because our philosophy is different. I said, thanks very much for telling me that. I was elected and you're just a rich man. And if you don't want to cooperate with me, I'm not giving you any oil from the North Sea. So I kept them out. And a year later, they turned up and capitulated. I mean, you have to bargain with big companies. You can't just leave them to run the world because they have no interest in the British economy. Their only interest is in their profit. They don't care whether the British economy goes up or down. They just want profits and power. And by God, I've dealt with so many multinational corporations in my life, and I tell you, what they want and what they expect us to give them would destroy democracy completely, would even destroy health and education, because, as you know, the level playing field the World Trade Organization is trying to introduce would mean that you wouldn't be allowed to subsidize your schools. You'd have to privatize them. And talking to Kenneth Kaunda, an old friend of mine from Zambia, he said, we had a great debt. The IMF came to us and said, we'll clear your debt if you'll sell all your schools and hospitals to multinational corporations. We were robbed by them. And he's right. That's why Chavez is winning. And you know the richest country in the world today per capita? Norway. Why? Because they nationalized their oil.